I never thought a simple question could unravel everything. Emma's voice broke the circle of folding chairs, her words slicing through the soft hum of the community center's fluorescent lights. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and chamomile tea from the side table, where mismatched mugs sat cooling, their steam long faded into a gentle herbal whisper. Around her, 7 strangers in the facilitator leaned in, their faces a mosaic of guarded curiosity, eyes reflecting the warm glow of shared anticipation. She shifted on her seat, fingers tracing the frayed edge of her notebook, the paper rough and worn under her touch. It was the night he asked where I'd been, like I owed him an itinerary for my own life. I'd just come back from a walk, nothing special, just clearing my head after work. But his eyes, they narrowed, like I'd crossed some invisible line without even trying. Her breath caught, a pause that invited the unease to settle, coiling softly in the pit of stomachs around the room, the air thickening with quiet empathy. Liam sat across from her, knees bouncing faintly against the carpeted floor, a subtle rhythm echoing his inner unrest. He hadn't spoken yet, but his gaze fixed on Emma with an intensity that betrayed his own churning thoughts. Loneliness clung to him, like the faint scent of his cologne, sharp and seeking, mingling with the room's earthy undertones. After his breakup, every story felt like a mirror, reflecting the abandonment he dreaded most. He wanted to reach out, to connect, but fear pinned his tongue. What if sharing made him more alone, echoing in the vast quiet? The facilitator, a woman with kind eyes and a clipboard cradled gently in her hands, nodded with quiet encouragement. "Thank you, Emma." That moment of recognition, it's often small, but it cracks the foundation. Who else feels ready? Sophie, seated between them, straightened her posture, her protective instinct flaring like a quiet flame in the dim light. She glanced at Emma, then Liam, her anxiety threading through the air as surely as the woven patterns on the throw rug beneath their feet, soft and grounding. She dragged them here, insisting this group could mend what isolation couldn't. But now, watching Emma's vulnerability unfold, Sophie worried she'd pushed too hard, her support veering into control. "Go on, Liam," she murmured, her voice steady but laced with urgency, a gentle nudge toward the light. "It's okay to let it out." Liam swallowed, the sound audible in the brief silence, a ripple through the hushed room. His hands clasped together, knuckles whitening against the denim of his jeans, the fabric cool and familiar. "Mine was in the kitchen," he began, voice low and tentative, unfolding like a slow dawn. She'd promised we'd talk about our future, but instead, she twisted every word I said into proof I wasn't enough. I remember the steam from the pasta rising between us, blurring her face, and suddenly I saw it. The way she'd pull me close 1 minute, then push until I begged to stay. It hit me. This wasn't love. It was a trap I kept walking into, scared of the empty space outside. The group murmured softly, nods rippling like echoes in a calm pond. Emma met Liam's eyes, a flicker of shared understanding passing between them. Unsure, yes, but alive with a spark of recognition, warming the space between. Sophie's hand hovered near Liam's shoulder, not touching, just there. A silent vow to shield without smothering, her presence a steady anchor. As the stories wove on, the air thickened with that subtle discomfort, the unease of facades crumbling like old leaves in autumn, yet beneath it pulsed something brighter. The collective breath drawn in unison, a first step toward reclaiming what had been lost. Emma felt it in her chest, a tentative hope blooming amid the fracture, whispering that authenticity waited just beyond the break, soft and inviting. Liam sensed it too, the loneliness easing as voices joined his own, threads of connection weaving gently. And Sophie, for all her fears, allowed herself a small smile. Perhaps in this circle, they could all find their way to whole, hearts lifting in quiet unison. As the meeting dissolved into quiet goodbyes, Clara lingered by the door, Emma's confession echoing in her chest like a distant drum, steady and resonant. The drive home unfolded under a canopy of stars, the road's gentle curves mirroring the tentative hope blooming within her, headlights cutting soft paths through the night. Yet suspicion shadowed that light. His small deceptions, the way his gaze lingered too long, a subtle chill in the warm air. By the time she pulled into the driveway, resolve had taken root, a fragile promise of clarity waiting just beyond the threshold, glowing faintly in the porch light. It's like the ground shifted under me, you know? One minute we're laughing over dinner, and the next, his words twist everything into blame. Rachel's voice carried a quiet edge, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug, the ceramic warm from the tea she'd barely touched, its surface smooth and reassuring. The steam had long faded, leaving a faint herbal scent that mingled with the earthy undertone of the wooden floorboards in the community center, grounding the moment in quiet intimacy. Around the circle, heads nodded, the soft creak of chairs punctuating the shared silence, like breaths held in harmony. Liam leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the frayed edge of the carpet, threads worn soft by countless footsteps. He'd been quiet since Emma spoke, but now his words tumbled out, laced with a vulnerability that made his chest ache, raw and real. For me, it was the texts. Constant check-ins, like I couldn't breathe without reporting back. I thought it was care, but it felt like a leash tightening. I rushed into it after Sarah left, desperate not to be alone again. And there I was, ignoring the pull. Sophie reached out, her hand hovering briefly before resting on his arm. A gesture meant to steady, though her own pulse quickened with the familiar urge to fix it all, warm skin against denim. She glanced at Rachel, then back to Liam, her protective instinct flaring like a soft ember. You're seeing it now, though. That's the crack letting the light in. Don't let fear chain you to that pattern. Her tone held encouragement, but underneath lurked her anxiety, the shadow of overstepping into control, a quiet tension in the air. What if they didn't listen? What if she pushed too hard? Rachel shifted in her seat, the fabric of her sweater whispering against the chair, a soft hush in the contemplative space. Memories flickered, her ex's subtle jabs, disguised as jokes, eroding her confidence until suspicion became her constant companion, lingering like mist. I projected that onto everyone after, she admitted, her voice softening, unfolding gently. Told my sister her boyfriend was toxic before she even saw it. But that first moment, when he dismissed my dreams as silly, it planted this seed of doubt. I still feel it creeping in sometimes, wondering if I'm just imagining the red flags. The group murmured agreement, the air alive with the subtle rustle of notebooks and the distant hum of a vending machine down the hall, a steady undercurrent. Then Clara, who had been sitting cross-legged at the edge of the circle, her dark hair falling like a curtain over her face, straightened slowly, her hands, usually folded tightly in her lap, unclenched, fingers relaxing into openness. The stories had stirred something, a fragile resolve blooming amid the fracture, warm and insistent. I've been listening, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her breath, carrying a quiet strength. And I think I need to do something about it, right now. Eyes turned to her as she pulled out her phone, the screen's glow casting a soft blue light on her determined features, illuminating the hope in her eyes. Sophie's brow furrowed slightly, a mix of pride and worry etching her expression. She wanted to guide Clara, to ensure she didn't falter, but held back, sensing the moment's fragility, a delicate balance. Liam watched with quiet hope, his own loneliness echoing in her courage, while Rachel's gaze sharpened, suspicion flickering. Not at Clara, but at the unseen partner whose control she'd glimpsed in Clara's earlier hesitant shares, a shadow in the light. Clara dialed, the ringtone cutting through the room like a tentative heartbeat, echoing softly. When the voice answered on the other end, muffled and casual, she spoke clearly. We need to talk. About how you always decide where I go, what I say. It's not okay, and I see it now. A pause, then his response, defensive, probing, the words filtering through the speaker like distant thunder. Her shoulders squared, the weight of the group's silent support wrapping around her like a warm thread, uplifting and steady. Suspicion lingered in the air, a shared vigilance against the hidden toxicities, but so did the uplifting spark of action, a fracture mending toward wholeness, gentle and profound. As the call ended, Clara exhaled, a small smile breaking through, lighting her face like dawn. The circle felt lighter, the contemplative rhythm of their gathering pulsing with newfound possibility, hearts sinking in quiet harmony. Liam met Sophie's eyes, a silent nod passing between them. Hope, fragile yet real, weaving through the cracks like sunlight through leaves. As the group lingered in the fading light of the community center, Clara absorbed Rachel's confession like a quiet promise of shared healing, her own heart lifting with tentative hope, warm and expanding. That evening, back in the soft glow of her apartment, she gathered her courage to reach out, the warmth of connection still lingering in her veins. Yet beneath it, a subtle tremor of fear began to stir, whispering of vulnerabilities yet to unfold, a soft undercurrent in the peaceful space. "And what about you, Emma? When did that first crack appear for you?" Sophie's voice cut gently through the quiet hum of the community center, her eyes fixed on Emma with a steady warmth that belied the knot of worry twisting in her chest, a hidden tension. She leaned forward on the worn couch, the fabric soft against her palms, urging her friend to open up, while silently vowing not to let the shadows pull her under, her presence a gentle light. Emma hesitated, her gaze dropping to the frayed edge of the throw pillow in her lap, threads unraveling slightly under her fingers. The faint scent of chamomile from Rachel's untouched mug lingered, a soothing undercurrent to the vulnerability unfolding, blending with the polished oak of the bookshelves. She took a slow breath, the air carrying that subtle warmth, and began, her voice emerging like a tentative stream. "It was during that weekend getaway we planned, the one to the cabin by the lake. I thought it would fix things, bring us closer. I'd been feeling smothered, like my every choice needed his stamp of approval. So, one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the water in golds and oranges, I tried to talk. 'We need to make space for each other,' I said, my voice barely above the lap of waves against the dock, gentle and rhythmic. 'I love you, but I feel like I'm disappearing.' Rachel nodded slowly, her own memories stirring like leaves in a breeze she couldn't quite catch, soft and elusive. She wanted to wrap Emma in the lessons of her pain, to shield her from the echoes, but held back, fingers still on her mug, listening as if her healing depended on it, the ceramic grounding her. Emma's words quickened, her knuckles whitening around the pillow, fabric bunching under her grip. He laughed at first, like it was a joke. Then his face changed, eyes narrowing, voice sharpening into something accusatory. "You're always making this about you. If you loved me, you'd see how much I do for us." I pushed back, explained how his constant checking in, the little comments on my clothes, my friends, it all chipped away at me. But he exploded. "You're ungrateful. Without me, you'd be nothing." The words flew like shards, slicing through the peaceful dusk. He stormed off into the woods, leaving me alone on that dock, the water suddenly cold and vast beneath my feet, stars beginning to prick the sky. The room held its breath, the soft creak of the building settling around them like a shared exhale, warm and enveloping. Emma's chest rose and fell unevenly, the fear resurfacing in her eyes, raw, unfiltered, the terror of that isolation crashing back like waves. What if she lost herself again? What if speaking out only built higher walls? Sophie reached out, her hand covering Emma's, firm yet tender, a lifeline against the tide, skin warm and reassuring. "You weren't disappearing, Emma. You were waking up, and you're not alone here, not anymore." Her tone carried that protective edge, a quiet command to claim her worth, even as anxiety flickered in her own heart at the thought of failing them, a subtle shadow. Rachel leaned in, her voice a bridge from her haunted past, steady and inviting. "I know that silence after the storm, it feels like the end, but it's the start. You reached out then, and you're doing it now. That's strength, not fracture." Emma met their gazes, the fear ebbing just enough for a spark of hope to flicker, soft and growing. In their circle, Amid the warm glow of pendant lights and the faint murmur of distant voices, the crack in her facade began to mend. Not with perfection, but with the promise of shared light, uplifting and serene. As the echoes of shared stories faded from the community center, the night deepened into a contemplative hush, stars twinkling like distant hopes. Across the city, in the shadowed confines of her apartment, Clara sat amid the clutter of half-packed boxes, the air thick with the scent of forgotten routines, cardboard and faint dust. A profound awareness settled over her, like a gentle dawn, transforming despair's heavy veil into a quiet resolve, whispering of paths yet untrodden, and the uplifting promise of solitude's embrace, warm and inviting. Emma clutched the frayed edge of her scarf, twisting the wool between her fingers as the words tumbled out, soft and unhurried. It started with little things, him questioning where I'd been, who I was texting. I'd laugh it off at first, but then the isolation crept in, like fog rolling over the lake back home, cool and enveloping. He'd say I was overreacting, that I was the one changing, not him. The community center's soft lamplight flickered across her face, casting gentle shadows that softened the vulnerability in her eyes, warm hues dancing. Liam shifted on the threadbare armchair, his knee bouncing faintly against the wooden floorboards, the rhythmic tap echoing his inner churn, steady and insistent. He nodded, his voice emerging low and tentative, like a breath released. I get that. After my breakup, I kept chasing the next person, anyone to fill the quiet. But it was like I was handing over pieces of myself without realizing. Fear of being alone. It blinds you. Rachel sat across from them, her posture rigid on the edge of the couch, arms crossed as if shielding her chest from an invisible draft, the air carrying a subtle chill. The scent of chamomile tea lingered in the air from the mugs they'd shared earlier, mingling with the faint, earthy aroma of old books lining the shelves, pages whispering secrets. She listened, her gaze drifting to the window where the late afternoon sun filtered through sheer curtains, painting golden streaks on the scuffed hardwood, light and hopeful. Emma's story stirred something deep, an echo of her own unraveling years ago, the gaslighting whispers that had twisted her reality until she doubted her own reflections, shadows in the mind. As Emma's voice cracked on the memory of a locked door and tear-streaked apologies, the room seemed to tighten, the urgency of their shared confessions pressing in like a rising tide, gentle yet profound. Liam leaned forward, his hands clasping together to still their subtle shake, knuckles pale. It's like they're pulling strings you can't see until it's too late. I almost lost myself rushing into something new last month, ignoring the red flags because the loneliness screamed louder. Rachel's breath caught, the weight of it all settling heavy on her shoulders, a familiar burden lightening slightly. Memories flooded back unbidden. The apartment she'd once called home, now a cage of echoed arguments and eroded trust, walls echoing faintly. Her drive to heal surged, clashing with the defensive walls she'd built, but Emma's raw honesty pierced through, warm and clarifying. She couldn't project her pain onto them, not anymore. Not when validation hung in the balance for Emma, and Liam's fear mirrored her own buried dread of reliving that isolation. In that suspended moment, awareness bloomed, sharp and clarifying, like sunlight breaking through clouds, golden and uplifting. Rachel uncrossed her arms, her fingers brushing the cool metal of her keychain in her pocket. The spare to the shared apartment she still hadn't escaped, a small weight lifting. The decision crystallized, irreversible and liberating. "I'm done waiting," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath, resonant in the quiet. She stood, the couch creaking softly in protest, and pulled the key free, holding it up to the light where it glinted like a promise, catching the sun's rays. "Tonight, I pack my things and move out. No more letting the past dictate my steps. We heal by choosing ourselves, starting now." Emma's eyes widened, a spark of validation lighting her unsure expression, warm and affirming, while Liam's lonely facade cracked into a tentative smile, soft and genuine. The air hummed with possibility, their stories weaving a thread of collective strength. urging them forward into the hopeful expanse beyond the shadows, light expanding gently. As Emma's confession faded into the dimming light of the cafe, Clara lingered over her cooling tea, the shared words stirring echoes of her own unraveling choices, Steam's memory faint. Hours later, in the quiet sanctuary of her small apartment, the solitude pressed in like twilight shadows, uncertainty weaving through her thoughts like threads of fog, soft and ethereal. Yet, beneath the ache of isolation, a quiet courage bloomed, fragile but fierce, whispering of horizons yet to unfold, bathed in the soft promise of dawn, hopeful and serene. The echo of Emma's confession lingered in the dim glow of the cafe's hanging lamps, pulling Liam and Sophie closer across the scarred wooden table, grains worn smooth by time. She had spoken the words, her decision to walk away from the relationship that had twisted her into someone unrecognizable. And now the silence pressed in, heavy with the weight of what came next, contemplative and deep. Loneliness bloomed in her chest like an uninvited guest, sharp and insistent, as the memories flooded back unbidden, vivid and raw. The apartment she returned to that first night alone felt vast, its corners swallowing the light from a single bulb, shadows dancing softly. No more arguments disguised as concern, no more apologies laced with blame. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of city traffic, mocking her solitude, a steady rhythm outside. She had packed her bags in a rush, heart pounding with a mix of terror and resolve. But the door clicking shut behind her released a tide of doubt. What if she had it wrong? What if his words were right, and she was the fragile one, unraveling under her own illusions? Liam leaned forward, his eyes soft with the echo of his own losses, fingers absently tracing the rim of his cooling coffee mug, ceramic smooth and grounding. "I get it," he murmured, voice low and threaded with vulnerability, warm in the cozy space. "After my breakup, I chased shadows, anyone who might fill the empty space. But it only made the quiet louder." His drive to find connection warred with the fear gnawing at him, the dread of endless nights staring at the ceiling, unloved and unseen. He wanted to reach for her hand, to bridge the gap, but held back, afraid his eagerness might smother the fragile trust building between them, a delicate balance. Sophie watched Emma's face, her protective instincts flaring like a spark in dry tinder, quick and warm. She slid a napkin across the table, a small gesture amid the clink of nearby spoons and the rich aroma of fresh ground beans wafting from the counter, earthy and inviting. "You're not unraveling, Emma. You're emerging." Her words carried an anxious edge, born from the shadow of her own overreach, the way she sometimes pushed too hard, mistaking control for care. Yet here, in this shared vulnerability, she tempered it, offering space for Emma's truth to breathe, gentle and open. "Tell us what it felt like, that first step into the unknown." Emma's breath caught, the steam from her untouched tea curling upward like a question mark, faint and swirling. The isolation had clawed at her then, gaslighting whispers replaying in her mind. "You're nothing without me." Friends drifted, family questioned, and the world narrowed to a pinpoint of uncertainty, echoing in the quiet. But as she sat now, flanked by Liam's quiet empathy and Sophie's steady gaze, a flicker ignited deep within. Courage. Tentative at first, like sunlight piercing fog, soft and illuminating. She straightened, the frayed scarf loosening in her grip, wool relaxing. "It was terrifying," she admitted, her voice gaining strength, resonant and true. "Nights where I'd cry until my eyes burned, wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. But leaving, it was the first time I chose me. Not the version he wanted, but the real one, buried under all that doubt." The urgency in her story wove through the air, binding them tighter. Liam nodding with a hunger for the same redemption. Sophie exhaling in quiet relief, her fear of failure easing as she saw Emma's spark, warm and growing. In that moment, the crisis sharpened into clarity. loneliness giving way to the hopeful rhythm of voices intertwining, gentle and uplifting. Emma met their eyes, a small smile breaking through, lightening her features. And now? It feels like I can build something new, with people who see me. The words hung, not as an end, but a beginning. The table a sanctuary amid the gathering storm of their shared scars, cozy and safe. As the cafe's heavy silence gave way to the hush of parting footsteps, the night unfolded into quiet introspection for Clara, shadows softening. Alone in her dimly lit apartment, the weight of shared confessions lingered like a fading echo, stirring dormant resolve within her, warm and steady. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating paths long obscured, silver and gentle, and with each steady breath, hope bloomed, gentle, insistent, whispering of clarity and the strength to reclaim what was hers, a soft promise in the dark. Rachel's fork scraped sharply against her plate, the metallic screech slicing through the cafe's murmur like a sudden breath held too long, echoing briefly. The sound yanked Liam and Sophie from their reverie, their eyes snapping to her as fragments of crème brûlée scattered across the scarred wood, sweet scent rising faintly. She stared at the mess, her knuckles whitening around the utensil, as if the act had unleashed something buried deep, raw and insistent. "I've been quiet," Rachel said, her voice steady but laced with the edge of a gathering storm, unfolding slowly. She pushed the plate aside, the motion deliberate, reclaiming the space in front of her, wood smooth under her hand. Listening to Emma's words, they echo what I buried years ago. But tonight, it's time I dig it up. Liam leaned forward, his fingers absently tracing the rim of his cooling coffee mug, the ceramic warm against his skin from the steam that had long since faded, grounding him. He wanted to reach out, to bridge the loneliness that clawed at him since his breakup, but fear held him back. Another rejection, another empty night, a quiet dread. Sophie, beside him, nodded encouragingly, though her protective instinct flared. She could sense the fragility in Rachel's posture, the way her shoulders hunched as if bracing for an invisible blow. Sophie bit her lip, anxious not to overstep, yet driven to shield her friend from the shadows of doubt, her breath measured. Rachel's gaze drifted to the window, where the streetlights cast golden pools on the pavement outside, illuminating passers-by wrapped in coats against the evening chill, soft and distant. The scent of fresh ground beans mingled with the faint caramelized sugar from her dessert, grounding her in the moment, rich and comforting. "It started with small things," she began, her words unfolding like a slow unraveling, contemplative and deep. "He'd say I was too sensitive, that I imagined the barbs in his jokes. Isolation crept in. Friends drifted, because they didn't understand us. Gaslighting turned my memories to mist. I'd question if I'd really heard him right, if my feelings were valid." The urgency built in her telling, each phrase tightening the air around the table, yet laced with hope. Liam felt it mirror his own rushes into arms that never stayed, his fear of abandonment twisting like a knot in his chest, loosening slightly. Sophie gripped the edge of the table, her drive to affirm their worth surging, though her shadow loomed. The urge to dictate Rachel's path, to insist she see the truth as Sophie saw it, held in check. "But here, now," Rachel continued, her voice gaining a resonant clarity that cut through the haze, bright and steady. "I see it all. The manipulation wasn't love, it was a cage I built around myself." She straightened, the movement sending a ripple through her dark curls, catching the lamplight, glowing softly. A newfound strength bloomed in her eyes, hopeful and unyielding, like dawn-piercing fog, warm and expansive. "I'm done reclaiming his version of me. Tonight, I choose this, us, these stories, my own voice. I walk away from that ghost for good." Liam's breath caught, a spark of acceptance igniting in his lonely heart. Sophie's anxiety eased into quiet pride, her protectiveness softening as she witnessed Rachel's resolve, a gentle release. The cafe's hum resumed around them, clinking spoons, muffled laughter. But in their circle, the tension crested into something lighter. A shared urgency forging bonds stronger than isolation's pull, uplifting and true. Rachel smiled faintly, the expression lifting the weight from her features, and reached for her coffee, sipping the rich, bitter warmth, as if tasting freedom itself, deep and satisfying. In that contemplative pause, hope wove through their words, a thread pulling them toward healing, soft and persistent. Days slipped by in the wake of that fractured evening, the cafe's tension dissolving into a quiet undercurrent of unresolved longing, fading gently. Across the waking city, Clara carried a similar tremor in her chest, her steps leading her to the door of a small, cozy apartment, bathed in morning light, golden and welcoming. With boxes unpacked like whispers of possibility, exhilaration mingled with unease, urging her toward the colors and relics that promised to reveal her hidden self, vibrant and hopeful. I can't pretend anymore. The thought slices through Rachel's mind like the fork still gripped in her fist, its tines bent slightly from the pressure, metallic and cool. She drops it, the clatter echoing against the cafe's tiled floor, pulling Sophie's gaze sharper and Emma's softer one from their half-eaten desserts. A sudden ripple. Liam shifts uncomfortably in his seat across the table, but Rachel barely registers him. Her world narrows to the three women who've anchored her through this haze, their presence warm and steady. Rach? Sophie's voice cuts in first, low and steady, her hand reaching across the scarred wood to cover Rachel's, skin soft and reassuring. Protective instinct flares in her eyes, but beneath it, anxiety flickers. What if she pushes too hard, smothers the fragile trust they're building? She leans forward, the faint scent of her lavender perfume mingling with the cafe's lingering aroma of fresh espresso and vanilla, soothing and rich. Talk to us. Whatever it is, we're here. Rachel swallows, her throat dry as sandpaper. The memories flood back unbidden. The endless apologies, the way her ex's charm twisted into control, night after night, until the perfect facade she'd worn like armor cracked irreparably, shards of light breaking through. It was all a lie, she whispers, her voice gaining strength as the words spill out, raw and liberating. That relationship I told you about, the one everyone envied? I stayed because I thought leaving would break me. But staying, it was killing me inside. The fights, the gaslighting. I projected it all onto you both, didn't I? Warning you off your own doubts like mine were the only truth. Her chest heaves, vulnerability raw in the open air, defensive walls crumbling as tears well but don't fall. Healing demands this, she reminds herself, even if reliving it stirs the old terror, a fading shadow. Emma watches, her fingers twisting the edge of a napkin into tight pleats, the paper softening under her touch like her resolve, gentle and unfolding. Self-doubt coils in her gut, a familiar shadow, but Sophie's supportive nod across the table urges her forward, warm encouragement. She's been seeking this validation, clinging to the group's warmth to reclaim what her own relationship stole, her sense of self, buried under layers of compliance. I know that feeling, Emma says finally, her voice tentative yet resolute, unfolding the napkin as if releasing a breath, soft sigh. Mine wasn't violent like yours, Rach, but it was a cage all the same. He decided everything, my clothes, my friends, even how I laughed. I faked perfection for years, afraid if I stopped, I'd lose who I was entirely. Sophie nods, her own anxiety easing into quiet resolve, though the fear of failing them gnaws at her edges, subtle and passing. She wants to wrap them both in certainty, ensure they see their worth shining through the pain. But she holds back, letting the moment breathe, open and free. You're not losing anything now, she murmurs, her tone a gentle anchor, steadying. You're finding it. Emboldened, Emma straightens, a spark of authenticity lighting her features, bright and warm. That's why I did it. Moved into that tiny apartment on Elm Street last week. It's nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with creaky floors and sunlight spilling through the windows at dawn, golden and pure. But I unpacked boxes yesterday, filled the shelves with my sketchbooks, the colorful mugs I hid away, the plants that actually thrive because I water them on my schedule. She pauses, exhilaration warring with terror in her chest. The new space both sanctuary and unknown territory, inviting yet vast. Unease prickles her skin, the what-ifs of solitude, the echo of old control whispering she'll falter alone. Yet, as she describes the soft throw blanket draped over the worn sofa, the wall of mismatched frames holding photos of solo adventures, hope blooms tentative and bright, uplifting. It's terrifying, starting over like this. But for the first time, it feels like mine. No more masks. Rachel reaches for Emma's hand, the touch bridging their shared fractures, warm and connecting. While Sophie smiles faintly, her protective drive swelling with quiet pride, genuine and soft. In this corner of the cafe, amid the hum of distant conversations and the warm glow of pendant lights, their confessions weave a fragile tapestry. Pain exposed, but vulnerability met with uplift. A contemplative rhythm carrying them toward something real, hopeful, and enduring. Unease lingers in the air, a subtle undercurrent to their raw honesty. Yet it's laced with the promise of dawn after a long night, light breaking through. The clatter of the fork hung in the air, a fragile admission that unraveled the evening's fragile peace, echoing softly. Rachel's self-doubt coiled tighter in the days that followed, mirroring the quiet uncertainties echoing through the therapy group, a gentle undercurrent. 3 days later, amid the warm hum of a local community event, banners fluttering under a hopeful sun, colors vibrant. Clara wandered the booths, her heart a contemplative whisper of lingering shadows, drawn toward unfamiliar faces that promised shared light, welcoming and bright. That's when Rachel realized the weight she'd carried wasn't just hers anymore. It spilled into the faces around her, etched in the tentative smiles of strangers turned confidants, soft and affirming. The community center buzzed softly with the murmur of folding chairs, scraping against polished wood, and the faint scent of fresh coffee, mingling with wildflowers from the bouquet on the welcome table, petals delicate and fragrant. She stood near the edge of the circle, her hands clasped loosely in her lap, the therapy group's impromptu gathering feeling less like an obligation and more like a fragile bridge over rushing waters, steady and inviting. Emma shifted beside her, knees drawn up slightly on the worn cushion, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the hem of her sweater, threads soft. The drive to claim her voice had pulled her here, to this local event celebrating stories of resilience. But now doubt coiled in her chest like a vine she couldn't uproot, gentle yet persistent. "I thought if I just performed it right," she began, her voice threading through the quiet, unfolding slowly. "The perfect couple thing, he'd see me, really see me." The words hung, raw and unpolished, drawing nods from the others, warm agreement. Liam, across the circle, leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, eyes bright with that tentative optimism that masked his deeper ache, hopeful light. He wanted connections that lasted, ones built on truth, not the frantic glue of fear. Rachel's breath caught. Her own facade had cracked back in that cafe, the fork's clatter a prelude to this moment, resonant still, but watching Emma unravel stirred the shadow in her, a urge to overlay her scars onto this younger woman's pain. She pushed it down, focusing instead on the warmth of the room, the way sunlight slanted through high windows to gild the edges of Liam's notebook, where he'd jotted fragments of his journey, pages glowing. "For me," Rachel said, her tone steady, yet laced with the guard she still wore like armor, softening gradually. "It was the mornings. Waking up beside him, pretending the silences were peaceful instead of prisons. Until one day, I couldn't. The lie tasted like ash." She paused, the confession pulling at the trauma she'd buried, her fear of reliving it flickering like a distant flame, warm embers. But sharing it here, in this circle of folding tables and half-filled mugs, felt like exhaling after too long underwater, freeing and light. Liam met her gaze, his own vulnerability surfacing in the slight furrow of his brow, earnest and open. He'd rushed into loves before, chasing away the specter of solitude. But tonight, the group's energy urged him toward something slower, truer, gentle rhythm. "I get that," he murmured, voice low and earnest, connecting deeply. "I'd build these walls around us, perfect dates, endless reassurances, because being alone terrified me more than being hurt. But pretending? It hollowed me out. His words bridged the space between them, prompting Emma to lift her chin, her self-doubt easing just a fraction, as she recognized her reflection in their stories. Not invalidation, but solidarity, a shared unraveling that made the air feel lighter, infused with possibility, uplifting and serene. As the circle leaned in, confessions weaving like threads in a tapestry, soft and intricate, Rachel felt a quiet hope bloom, warm in her chest. No projections, no rushing, just the raw beauty of masks slipping away, revealing hearts ready to mend, gentle and true. Emma's hand brushed hers, a small anchor, reassuring touch, and Liam's nod carried the promise of bonds, forged in honesty, steadfast. In that moment, self-doubt didn't drown them. It illuminated the path forward, one vulnerable step at a time, light guiding softly. In the weeks that followed, the echoes of shared burdens lingered like a gentle current, drawing isolated hearts toward one another. Warm flow. Clara and Alex, strangers no longer, felt the pull of newfound closeness amid their quiet uncertainties, tentative, yet real. With tentative hope blooming in their chests, they chose a path forward together. A self-love workshop, its promise of supportive embrace shimmering on the horizon like dawn's first light, golden and inviting. The faint aroma of chamomile tea wafted from the steaming mugs on the circle of low tables, pulling Emma back. Her own hands, once clenched around a bouquet of wilting daisies at her ex's doorstep, whispering apologies she didn't mean, petals soft and drooping. She blinked, the memory dissolving into the soft glow of the community center's workshop room, warm and enveloping. Folding chairs formed a loose semicircle now, the earlier coffee scents faded, replaced by this herbal warmth that promised solace, soothing and deep. Emma shifted beside Liam, their knees brushing accidentally, or not, under the table, a subtle spark. Sophie sat across from them, her notebook open, pen poised like a gentle sentinel, ready. The facilitator, a woman with kind eyes and a voice like wind chimes, had just prompted the group. Share the mask you've worn longest in love. What broke it? Liam went first, his voice steady, but laced with that tentative optimism he carried, like a fragile lantern, glowing softly. I rushed into us, Emma, because the quiet after my last breakup echoed too loud. I feared the emptiness, so I built walls of grand gestures, pretending perfection was just around the corner. He met her gaze, vulnerability cracking his usual easy smile, open and true. But last month, when you pulled away during that argument, I couldn't fake the charm anymore. I sat alone in my car, tears blurring the dashboard, realizing love isn't a race to fill the silence. It's brave enough to let it breathe. Emma's throat tightened, her drive to assert herself surging against the old fear of losing her edges, a inner tide. She glanced at Sophie, who nodded subtly, her own controlling instincts held in check for once, empowering without overstepping, gentle support. The room hummed with quiet affirmations from the other participants, strangers who'd become echoes of shared ache. And Emma felt the uplift of it, like sunlight filtering through leaves, warm and dappled. I wore the mask of the perfect partner, Emma confessed, words tumbling out raw, her fingers tracing the mug's rim for anchor, porcelain smooth. The steam curled upward, carrying hints of honey and earth, grounding her deeply. Smiling through the doubts, seeking your validation, Liam, because without it, I doubted my own worth. But that night you forgot our plans, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty table, and the facade shattered. I cried, not for you, but for the self I let fade. I won't be controlled again. I choose us now, on my terms. Sophie's turn came softly, her voice a bridge between them, connecting warmly. She leaned forward, respecting their autonomy, even as her fear of failing them flickered in her eyes, subtle shadow. I've been the overbearing friend, pushing you both toward better because I couldn't bear watching you hurt. My shadow? Controlling the narrative to protect my heart from your pain spilling over. A pause, contemplative, the rhythm of her breath syncing with the group's, steady flow. It broke when I saw you two last week, raw and real without my script. I want to empower, not steer. Let you stumble into your own light. Liam reached for Emma's hand then, tentative, his fear of abandonment easing in the shared air, warm connection. She squeezed back, the touch hopeful, a thread weaving through their vulnerabilities, strong yet gentle. Sophie smiled, genuine, the workshop's energy lifting them like a collective exhale, uplifting sigh. Around them, the murmurs wove onward, stories of masks discarded, insecurities named aloud. Each confession a step toward something brighter, uncontained, light expanding. In that circle, pain bloomed into possibility. Vulnerability not a fracture, but the first honest breath of hope, fresh and renewing. As the steam from the chamomile tea curled upward like whispered secrets, Emma felt the room's gentle hush envelop her, the memory's sharp edges softening in the collective warmth, soothing embrace. Faces around the circle glowed with quiet empathy, the air thick with unspoken hopes, palpable and bright. In that suspended moment, a subtle shift stirred, Clara's posture straightening, her gaze lifting, as if the shared space itself beckoned her toward a bolder truth, inviting and warm. The steam from Clara's untouched mug curled like a hesitant confession, carrying the faint, earthy bite of chamomile into the circle of faces, enveloping softly. Liam shifted on his cushion, the woven fibers rough against his palms, as Sophie's gaze flicked toward him, supportive, yet edged with that familiar urge to steer the moment. Gentle tension. Rachel sat across from them, her fingers tracing the rim of her own cup, the porcelain cool and smooth under her touch, reassuring. The workshop's facilitator had just prompted them. "Share what binds you, if you're ready." The words hung, inviting, in the quiet hum of breathing and distant traffic outside the community center walls, steady rhythm. Rachel's voice emerged first, soft but steady, like a key turning in a long, rusted lock, unlocking gently. I thought I was protecting myself by staying silent. But it's been eating at me." She paused, her eyes meeting Liam's, tentative, mirroring his own vulnerability. And then Sophie's, who nodded without interrupting, her usual impulse to guide held back by a visible effort, respectful space. "My last relationship, it wasn't love. It was a cage. He'd twist my words, make me doubt every choice, until I believed I was nothing without him. I projected that fear onto everyone after. Told my friends they were imagining red flags, because facing my own truth meant admitting I'd been trapped." The group leaned in, the air alive with the subtle rustle of notebooks and the warmth of shared mugs, steam rising faintly. Liam felt a pull in his chest, his fear of abandonment echoing in her words, resonating deeply. He wanted to rush forward, to connect deeply and chase away the loneliness for both of them. But he held back, letting her unfold, patient and open. "I see it now," Rachel continued, her voice gaining a quiet rhythm, contemplative, as if unspooling a thread long knotted, smooth release. "I was afraid of reliving it, of the pain crashing back. But hiding it? That just kept me bound. And you all," she looked around, her guarded edges softening in the encouraging nods, warm affirmation. "You've shown me it's not weakness to say it out loud." Sophie exhaled, her hands unclenching from her lap, the fabric of her skirt whispering against her skin, soft hush. She fought the shadow of control, the drive to empower without overstepping, and simply said, "You're not alone in that fear, Rachel. We've all got our cages." Her words carried no directive, just a gentle bridge, respecting the autonomy blooming in the circle, uplifting connection. Emboldened, Rachel straightened, the weight lifting like fog burned away by dawn, light and clear. "I want to help others see it too, those still trapped, doubting their own eyes. Not by forcing my story on them, but by sharing it honestly, like this." Applause rippled softly, warm and uplifting, igniting something fierce in her eyes. Courage, raw and newfound, shining brightly. Liam smiled, tentative optimism threading through his vulnerability, hopeful glow. In that moment, fears articulated became bridges, not barriers. Truth exposed, binding them not in chains, but but in hope's quiet promise, gentle and enduring. The chamomile scent lingered, now mingled with the faint, sweet trace of relief on their breaths, soothing air. As the circle's shared silence deepened into quiet resolve, Clara finally lifted her mug, the chamomile's warmth seeping into her fingers like a gentle promise of release, comforting hold. The group lingered in that uplifting hush, hearts attuned to unspoken hopes, before voices softened into farewells, tender goodbyes. Yet, in the fading light of the workshop, a subtle tension stirred within her. A contemplative acceptance blooming amid old shadows, ready to meet whatever crossed the threshold next, open and hopeful. The echo of unspoken words that Clara had held back, now swallowed by the room's sudden hush, lingering softly. Sophie leaned forward, her fingers tracing the frayed edge of her journal, the paper soft and yielding under her touch, like the vulnerability she urged in others. Gentle encouragement. She wanted to guide them, Rachel with her guarded eyes, Emma fidgeting with the hem of her scarf, but the pull to direct felt like a tether tightening in her chest, held in check. "We don't have to rush," she said softly, her voice a gentle current amid the chamomile's lingering warmth, flowing easily. "Just let it surface." Rachel nodded, her breath steady but shallow, the faint scent of her lavender lotion mingling with the herbal steam, calming blend. She had come to share, not dominate, yet the old habit clawed at her, to weave her scars into their stories, to warn without listening, fading urge. Her toxic years with Mark flickered unbidden, the way his apologies had once tasted like honeyed lies, sweet yet bitter. "It's hard, isn't it?" she murmured to Emma, who sat cross-legged, knees drawn close, intimate circle. "Peeling back those layers, seeing what you've let define you." Emma's gaze drifted to the window, where late afternoon light filtered through sheer curtains, painting golden flecks on the wooden floor, warm specks. She craved this, to claim her voice, to push against the doubt that whispered she was still the girl who bent too easily, inner strength rising. But validation lingered as her crutch, a quiet ache in her throat. "I keep thinking I'll lose myself again," she admitted, words tumbling like pebbles into still water, rippling softly. "Like if I say no, it'll all unravel." The door creaked open then, unannounced, shattering the circle's fragile rhythm, wood groaning. Mark stood there, his shadow stretching long across the threshold, cologne sharp and intrusive like a memory forced awake, cutting the air. Not Clara's shadow, but Emma's, her ex, drawn by some whispered rumor of the workshop, his face etched with the false concern that had once trapped her, mask cracking. "Emma," he said, voice low and insistent, stepping inside without invitation. "We need to talk. This isn't you. Hiding with these people, pretending you're fixed." The air thickened, not with tension, but with the raw pulse of truths clawing free, vital and alive. Sophie rose halfway, her instinct to shield flaring, protect, intervene. But she caught herself, hands unclenching at her sides, restraint strong. She wouldn't overstep. This was Emma's ground, her moment. Rachel's pulse quickened, the echo of her own past roaring back, but she held her tongue, letting the moment breathe without her overlay, supportive silence. Emma stood, scarf slipping to the floor in a whisper of silk, soft fall. Her heart hammered, fear coiling like smoke, control slipping, self-dissolving. But beneath it, a spark ignited, bright and fierce. "You don't get to decide that anymore," she said, voice steadying, each word a step into light, resolute. "I stayed because I thought losing you meant losing me. But it was you taking pieces, not me giving them. I'm not hiding. I'm finding." Mark's protest hung, faltering as her eyes met his, unyielding, alive, glowing with inner fire. Rachel reached out, not to advise, but to touch Emma's arm lightly, a silent anchor, warm reassurance. Sophie watched, hope blooming quiet in her chest, the circle unbroken, strong bond. In that exchange, fears laid bare, dissolved into something softer, acceptance, like sunlight warming stone, promising paths untangled and forward, gentle warmth. Emma exhaled, the weight lifting. Her identity no longer a shadow, but a steady flame, enduring light. As the group dispersed into the evening's quiet embrace, Clara slipped away, her steps measured on the rain-slicked pavement, the weight of those unspoken words lingering like a half-formed shadow, fading mist. In the solitude of her apartment, doubts swirled, a fragile echo of the confrontation's sting, but with each breath, a quiet resolve bloomed. The tether of old validations frayed, giving way to the steady pulse of her own unyielding strength, a hopeful dawn breaking within, radiant and new. Outside, the distant hum of traffic pulsed like a relentless heartbeat. Inside, Emma's breath caught, a fragile whisper against the velvet cushions of the worn armchair, soft and cradling. Rachel's journal lay open on the low wooden table, its pages splayed like petals after a gentle wind, ink dark and inviting. She watched Emma, her eyes soft with the weight of shared silences, the faint scent of chamomile tea lingering from cups now cooling untouched. Herbal trace. "You've carried this so long," Rachel said, her voice a steady thread weaving through the room's quiet, connecting deeply. "But what if letting it out doesn't break you? What if it sets you free?" Emma shifted, the fabric of her sweater brushing her skin like a hesitant touch. Comforting weave. Her fingers curled into the armrest, not trembling, but pressing down as if anchoring herself to the earth, solid ground. The confrontation earlier, Liam's quiet admission of his fear of abandonment, Rachel's guarded unraveling of her own scars, had cracked something open, light seeping in. Now, in this suspended moment, the truth seeped in, raw and unfiltered, hopeful flow. She felt it rising, a tide of insecurities she'd buried under layers of compliance, the old reflex to shrink, to seek approval in the curve of someone else's smile, easing away. I don't know if I can," Emma murmured, her gaze dropping to the intricate weave of the rug beneath her feet, threads of gold and crimson catching the lamplight, warm glow. Liam sat across from her, his posture open, knees apart like an invitation, though his eyes held that tentative flicker of optimism shadowed by doubt, gentle light. He leaned in slightly, the floorboards creaking under his weight, a soft groan that echoed his own unspoken plea for connection, resonant. "You're already doing it," Liam said, his words measured, carrying the warmth of sunlight filtering through leaves, bright and reassuring. "Remember what you said earlier? About not wanting to lose yourself again. That's not just words, Emma. That's you fighting back." The air between them hummed with possibility, not the heavy press of judgment, but the light expansion of understanding, uplifting space. Emma lifted her chin, meeting Rachel's steady gaze, eyes connecting. The fear clawed at her still, the terror of control slipping away, of standing alone in her own skin without the crutch of validation. It whispered of her shadow, that nagging self-doubt that had once driven her to mold herself into shapes others desired. But here, in this circle of three, the truth unfolded. She was enough. Boundaries not walls, but bridges to her truest self, strong and open. Rachel nodded, a small smile breaking through her guarded reserve, careful not to overlay her own history onto Emma's fragile resolve, respectful distance. "It's scary, facing that mirror. But look around. You're not alone in it." Emma exhaled, the sound releasing like a bird taking flight, free and light. The crisis ebbed, replaced by a quiet strength blooming in her chest, warm and expansive, growing steadily. She straightened, her voice gaining edges honed by resolve, clear and true. "I've spent years waiting for someone to tell me it's okay to be me, but I don't need that anymore. I see it now. The control I feared? It's mine to claim." Liam's face lit with a genuine grin, his fear of isolation dissolving in the shared light of her words, warm release. Rachel closed her journal softly, the snap a punctuation of affirmation, crisp sound. In that moment, the room filled with the subtle scent of possibility, ink and tea, and the faint, hopeful trace of rain-kissed earth from an open window, fresh breeze. Empowerment settled over Emma like a mantle, not heavy but lifting, carrying her forward into the uncharted hope of who she was becoming. Bright horizon. As the evening shadows lengthened, Emma closed the journal with a soft sigh, its revelations stirring echoes of unresolved longings in the quiet room. Gentle stir. Miles away, in the soft glow of her laptop, Clara paused amid the city's fading hum, her fingers hovering over familiar icons, screen light blue. A quiet resolve stirred within her, like dawn breaking through lingering clouds, promising the first steps toward a lighter, unburdened tomorrow. Hopeful light. The living room, late afternoon. With the journal still open on the table, Emma's gaze lingered on the faded ink of Rachel's words, each loop and curve a ghost of confessions long buried, whispering softly. The scent of chamomile tea lingered from the mugs Sophie had brewed earlier, steam curling like forgotten promises, faint and warm. Liam sat cross-legged on the rug, his knee brushing hers, while Sophie perched on the arm of the couch, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. A small tell of her restraint, subtle motion. "I can't keep reading this," Emma murmured, her voice threading through the quiet like a needle seeking fabric, delicate stitch. The words blurred, not from tears, but from the weight they carried, cycles of control, pleas for validation that echoed her own hidden doubts, heavy yet lifting. Her phone lay beside the journal, screen dark, a silent sentinel to the life she'd almost reclaimed. Waiting. Liam leaned forward, his eyes soft with that tentative optimism she both cherished and feared. Gentle glow. "You don't have to. But maybe this is why we're here, to see it clearly." His hand hovered near hers, not touching, respecting the space she guarded so fiercely, careful distance. He wanted connection, real and unhurried, but the shadow of his own abandonment fears made him pause, waiting for her cue. Patient hope. Sophie nodded, her usual urge to direct the moment held back by a deep breath, calm inhale. "It's your story now, Emma. Not hers, not anyone else's." She spoke gently, empowering without overstepping, though her fingers stilled only after a visible effort, restraint firm. Protecting them all came naturally, but today she chose trust over command. Open heart. The room held them in its embrace, the faint creak of the floorboards under Liam's shift, punctuating the hush, soft echo. Emma's chest tightened, a collapse building, not of ruin, but of release, inner shift. Memories flooded, late-night texts from her ex, each one a tether pulling her back into the fog of control, eroding the edges of who she was, fading now. She'd sought his approval like air, doubting her own worth in the silence between replies. Staying meant safety in the familiar poison. Leaving meant facing the vast unknown, alone with her fears. But here, with Liam's quiet hope and Sophie's steady presence, the unknown shimmered differently. Not empty, but open, full of light. Emma's fingers brushed the phone, thumb tracing its edge, smooth surface. "He messaged again last night," she admitted, the words spilling out raw, contemplative, unfolding truth. "Promising change, like always. But it's just noise." Liam's voice came low, earnest. "You deserve more than echoes, more than fear." Sophie added, "And we're here, whatever comes. But it's yours to choose." The decision bloomed then, a quiet crescendo in the softening light, radiant peak. Emma unlocked the screen, the glow illuminating her determined face, bright resolve. One by one she navigated the apps, Instagram, texts, email, blocking his profile with deliberate taps, each one severing a thread, clean cut. No hesitation, only the steady rhythm of her breath, syncing with the distant traffic's hum, now a backdrop to freedom rather than chaos, harmonious flow. The final block sealed it, a digital wall, irreversible, symbolizing the love she vowed to herself first, strong foundation. She set the phone down, face up, empty of notifications. A small laugh escaped her, light and surprised, joyful sound. "It's done." The word hung, Not as an end, but a beginning. Hope unfurling like the journal's pages in a gentle breeze she could finally feel. Soft wind. Liam smiled, vulnerability easing into warmth as he squeezed her hand, reassuring grip. Sophie exhaled, her eyes bright with unspoken pride, glowing softly. In that shared silence, the collapse transformed. Toxicity yielding to possibility. Fears challenged by the strength of their circle, uplifting bond. Emma leaned back, the armchair cradling her like an old friend, and for the first time, the future felt not just brighter, but hers, boundless and hopeful.